Welcome to this program on cryptocurrency, which is presented by the League of Women Voters of Tompkins County and the League of Women Voters of Cortland County. I am Kay Wagner, co-president, along with Sally Grubb of the Tompkins County League. Sheila Cohen is president of the Cortland County League. I also co-chair, along with Susan Malter, the Natural Resources Committee of the Tompkins League. For those of you who are not familiar with the League of Women Voters and mainly see us registering voters at local events, I want to say a few words about what we do. First and foremost, we are politically nonpartisan. We do not support or oppose any candidates or political parties, but we do study issues, take positions on them, and lobby and educate on some of these issues. The League has a long and deep history of work on the environment, especially on issues involving air and water. In brief, the League of Women Voters of the United States believes that natural resources should be managed as interrelated parts of life-supporting ecosystems. Resources should be conserved and protected to assure their future availability. Pollution of these resources should be controlled in order to preserve the physical, chemical, and biological integrity of ecosystems and to protect public health. So it is with all of this in mind that we bring you our program on cryptocurrency tonight. Members of our audience may submit questions via the chat function during the course of the presentation. Pam Talbert, Ann Ward, and Sally Grubb, Tompkins County League members, will review the questions and where appropriate, group them together so that as many as possible can be answered. They will be answered by our speaker at the end of her talk. And now I turn over the introductions to Susan Malter, who will introduce our speaker.
First, I would like to thank our co-sponsors, of which we have 4. The Campaign for Renewable Energy, Fossil-Free Tompkins, People for a Healthy Environment, and Sustainable Tompkins. Thank you all for your support. I also want to thank Megan Nettleton, who isn't seen up here, but she did much of the behind the work scenes on publicity, which we changed many times. Thank you for your persistence, Megan. Little did we know when we started planning this program back in November, that on January 7th, that's just 6 days ago, a bill in the New York State Senate would be amended to become identical to one already in the New York State Assembly, making them easier for concerned citizens to act upon, and so relevant to our program tonight that the speaker has modified her presentation to include them. I now have the honor of introducing that flexible person, Irene Weiser. For 10 years, Irene has been coordinator of Fossil-Free Tompkins, whose notable accomplishments include winning the fight to close the coal-burning Cayuga power plant on Cayuga Lake in Lansing, and stopping the Dryden pipeline. The latter achievement led to the state urging utilities to consider non-pipe alternatives, such as conservation and heat pumps, before expanding fossil fuel infrastructure. Irene has served on the Tompkins County Energy and Economic Development Task Force, and she currently serves on the county's Climate and Sustainable Energy Advisory Committee. Irene has served on the Town of Caroline Board for 2 terms and chaired the Tompkins County Council of Governments for 2 years. Irene, go for it.
Well, thank you, Susan, for that great introduction, and to Kay and Sally and the rest of the league for having me here to give this important talk tonight. it is really timely. The legislative session is just getting underway, and we got work to do. So yeah, I'm not great on small talk. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and jump in with my presentation. And I look forward to hearing from people in the chat and addressing questions. I'm going to start by sharing my screen and then start the slideshow from the beginning. So tonight I'm going to be talking on Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and blockchain, both the promise and the peril. I'm not somebody who's totally anti-crypto. I think there's some interesting possibilities, and we'll touch on those. But we'll mostly get into the environmental concerns that I have and that I hope you will have. And I should just say, this is a phenomenal turnout tonight. So thank you to everyone who's here. It's really pretty exciting to know that, that I'm going to be able to speak to people. I presume you're from all across the state and perhaps even the country. This is a burgeoning issue, and it's showing up everywhere. So I'm glad you're here. So just an overview of what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to talk about Bitcoin and blockchain and proof of work, and really help you develop. We're going to start by developing the vocabulary, because this is all pretty new and foreign words and foreign language. So, we're going to quickly go through that and talk about the promise and the peril. Spend quite a bit more time talking about the environmental impacts globally in the U.S. and in New York State. Touch on the alternatives and some New York State legislation, and even an upcoming congressional hearing that we just learned about. A few disclaimers before I get too into it. I am not an economist or a computer scientist, so I don't have super in detail understanding of all the nuances of cryptocurrency and how it works. The purpose of this talk is to provide, with the help of some videos, a sort of shared vocabulary so that we can have a conversation and understand what we're talking about. I'm not here to endorse any kind of cryptocurrency or any particular brand. My focus really is going to be to talk about blockchain's impact on reaching New York's greenhouse gas reduction and renewable energy goals. So to get started, welcome to the world of Web 3. You have undoubtedly lived through the world of Web 1 and Web 2. Web 1 or 1.0 was basic websites and hyperlinks, and that was a big deal when it first started. Web 2.0 was social media and all of the ways that we were able to interconnect on the web. Web 3 is a version of the web that's still, developing, and we'll see where it takes us. It's the beginning of that phase, but it's thought that it will allow the web to bring value and exchange value. So one of those mediums of exchange that you've probably heard of is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is one of many types. I think there's over 6,000 now types of cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrency is but one use of a system or structure called blockchain, which is really incredibly revolutionary. And we'll spend a bit of time learning what that is. And finally, blockchain is just one of a number of types of what are called distributed ledger technologies. So don't be scared of these words. We're just getting started, but I wanted to kind of give you the shape and the context of what we're going to be talking about. So what is cryptocurrency? Cryptocurrency is digital money. As I said, there's about 6,000 brands. Bitcoin is the leading brand. It has about 45% of the market share right now. Some people use it as actual money. for purchasing goods and services, and there are any number of ways you can do that online if you're so inclined. Others, and I think, you know, a good number of people use it as an asset or an investment, somewhat similar to stocks. So they may use what's called fiat currency, US dollars or whatever, you know, kinds of dollars are native to that person to buy some coins of a certain type, and then wait and see if it appreciates over time. Bitcoin is, and this is maybe a little bit unusual, Bitcoin is not just this digital money. It's also a platform. And my best way to explain what a platform is, and this is not accurate, you know, if you're a computer scientist out there, you're going to cringe. But I think it's helpful because it's familiar to people to think of a platform as being, so if you have an iPhone or an iPad, you use iOS as your platform, we'll say. And there's any number of other apps that can work on it and be built on it. There are different kinds of platforms, and Ethereum is another platform, and it also has a currency that works on that platform. And again, there are other currencies and other functions that work on the Ethereum platform. So to help further, I'm going to move forward with a video that I hope will help to explain not only what blockchain is, but a little bit about the possibility and why it's actually something to be excited about and interest, or at least interested in.
Many people think of blockchain as the technology that powers Bitcoin. While this was its original purpose, blockchain is capable of so much more. Despite the sound of the word, there's not just one blockchain. Blockchain is shorthand for a whole suite of distributed ledger technologies that can be programmed to record and track anything of value, from financial transactions to medical records or even land titles. You might be thinking, we already have processes in place to track data. What's so special about blockchain? Let's break down the reasons why blockchain technology stands to revolutionize the way we interact with each other. Reason number one, the way it tracks and stores data. Blockchain stores information in batches called blocks that are linked together in a chronological fashion to form a continuous line, metaphorically, a chain of blocks. If you make a change to the information recorded in a particular block, you don't rewrite it. Instead, the change is stored in a new block, showing that X changed to Y at a particular date and time. Sound familiar? That's because blockchain is based on the centuries-old method of the general financial ledger. It's a non-destructive way to track data changes over time. Here's one example. Let's say there was a dispute between Anne and her brother Steve over who owns a piece of land that's been in the family for years. Because blockchain technology uses the ledger method, there is an entry in the ledger showing that Adam first owned the property in 1900. When Adam sold the property to Dave in 1930, a new entry was made in the ledger, and so on. Every change of ownership of this property is represented by a new entry in the ledger, right up until Anne bought it from their father in 2007. Anne is the current owner, and we can see that history in the ledger. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Unlike the age-old ledger method, originally a book, then a database file stored on a single system, blockchain was designed to be decentralized and distributed across a large network of computers. This decentralizing of information reduces the ability for data tampering and brings us to the second factor that makes blockchain unique. It creates trust in the data. Before a block can be added to the chain, a few things have to happen. First, a cryptographic puzzle must be solved, thus creating the block. The computer that solves the puzzle shares the solution to all of the other computers on the network. This is called proof of work. The network will then verify this proof of work, and if correct, the block will be added to the chain. The combination of these complex math puzzles and verification by many computers ensures that we can trust each and every block on the chain. Because the network does the trust building for us, we now have the opportunity to interact directly with our data in real time. And that brings us to the third reason blockchain technology is such a game changer: no more intermediaries. Currently, when doing business with one another, we don't show the other person our financial or business records. Instead, we rely on trusted intermediaries, such as a bank or lawyer, to view our records and keep that information confidential. These intermediaries build trust between the parties and are able to verify, for example, that, yes, Anne is the rightful owner of this land. This approach limits exposure and risk, but also adds another step to the exchange, which means more time and money spent. If Anne's land title information was stored in a blockchain, she could cut out the middleman, her lawyer, who would ordinarily confirm her information with Steve. As we now know, all blocks added to the chain have been verified to be true and can't be tampered with, so Anne can simply show Steve her land title information secured on the blockchain. Anne would save considerable time and money by cutting out the middleman. This type of trusted peer-to-peer interaction with our data can revolutionize the way we access, verify, and transact with one another. And because blockchain is a type of technology and not a single network, it can be implemented in many different ways. Some blockchains can be completely public and open to everyone to view and access. Others can be closed to a select group of authorized users, such as your company, a group of banks, or government agencies. And there are hybrid public-private blockchains too. In some, those with private access can see all the data, while the public can see only selections. In others, everyone can see all the data, but only some people have access to add new data. A government, for example, could use a hybrid system to record the boundaries of Anne's property and the fact that she owns it while keeping her personal information private. Or it could allow everyone to view property records, but reserve to itself the exclusive right to update them. It is the combination of all these factors, decentralizing of the data, building trust in the data, and allowing us to interact directly with one another and the data, that gives blockchain technology the potential to underpin many of the ways we interact with one another. But, much like the rise of the internet, this technology will bring with it all kinds of complex policy questions around governance, international law, security, and economics.
So I'm going to stop it there. They're right. It does bring these kinds of policy questions. I am not getting into those. I don't have the information or the background to be able to. But the one policy area that they didn't mention is the one that's of great concern to me, and I suspect to many of you, which is the environment. So I'm going to get us out of that and go back to screen sharing or back to a slideshow view. Just to summarize, I know we just went through this in the video, but some of the key features of a blockchain is that it's a decentralized electronic ledger, that there are no intermediaries, and that there's a series of transactions that get duplicated across a network. The transactions are transparent, although your own identity is generally not. The chain is secure and immutable, and there are different structures to the blockchains. There can be public, private, and hybrids. And some of the uses that were just briefly mentioned were smart contracts and, as we know, cryptocurrency. So we're going to spend most of the time talking about cryptocurrency, but I do just want to touch on smart contracts because I think that they are actually really pretty exciting and I think are going to get a lot of traction. They are often private or hybrid and not fully decentralized. And they also don't always rely on this complex math algorithm, and we'll get more into that and why it exists in just a few slides. But smart contracts don't necessarily have to have those. Some examples of how a smart contract could be used would be to certify things in a supply chain, that this is, actually really truly fair trade organic coffee that was grown with fair labor practices and sustainably harvest and saw X amount of hours of sun or whatever criteria you wanted to have certified. An interesting area that I learned they are using blockchain for now is college degrees. So for those of you that wrote resumes and you fudged the degrees that you have, can't do that anymore because it can be checked on a blockchain. Some of you may have gotten a New York State COVID passport on your phone to prove that you've been vaccinated. That uses a blockchain system. One of the areas I'm really intrigued by is in Brooklyn. There are solar panels on some, buildings, homes in the Park Slope area. And if their solar is producing more energy than they're using in their building, they can sell that energy to neighbors. So I think that that's a really cool kind of application. And last, and as they indicated in this slideshow or in this video, real estate deeds. There's also, 20 uses for blockchain and its supply chain and in cars to be able to certify how many miles it actually really has, no turning back the dial on the odometer. Intellectual property is a really big area to be able to track who owns stuff. Once you have stuff on the internet, who owns a picture? Because, you can send a copy of that picture and then other people can send a copy of that picture. So whose picture is it? And there's a big area for that of digital identity and intellectual property. So I just wanted to touch on that because it's a very promising area that there's going to be a lot of expansion in. But let's get more into the promise and the peril of cryptocurrency. And the promise of it, I also find really exciting. It's got a vision of being able to democratize money and trade so that there's no intermediaries, that it's this not really peer-to-peer network, but a network where the exchange happens and it happens quickly, as opposed to, I suspect many of you have had the experience where you put a deposit in the bank and they tell you have to wait 5 days until that money really counts as being there, which is crazy. But it's because there's intermediaries and our bank has to contact the central bank that then has to contact whoever wrote the checks bank, and then they have to verify that the money's really there and it comes back through the central bank, and then it's kind of a crazy slow system, and it becomes even more that way if you're doing changing of currencies in different nationalities, different countries, and there are people in developing areas who don't even have banking accessible, whereas this could be accessible just through a cell phone. People also see it as potentially a hedge against inflation and a possibility of having a universal currency. So I think that all of these ideas are really exciting. But here's a collection of headlines that I just grabbed. These are all fairly recent headlines. You can see that, let's say a little bit of caveat emptor here. Need to be a little careful of what you're getting into. It's quite volatile. It has been used because of the ability to hide your identity somewhat. It's been used for trafficking, and I just saw actually in the governor's budget, she's putting money to be able to monitor blockchain transaction for gun dealers. So there's a dark side to it. Ransomware, the pipeline that was recently shut down and held hostage. So the promise versus the peril, a lot of it, as you'll see, involves not just really peer-to-peer, but large money investors. It's very volatile, has no inherent value. There's hacking and fraud, pyramid and Ponzi schemes. I will say I've not been aware of anybody that has tampered with the chain, but there are, hacking and fraud that happens through the mechanisms that you use to buy and sell and trade. there's dark money, criminal enterprises, and, you know, again, the issue that's near and dear to my heart is the environmental problems. So I want to dial back now and get a little bit more into the weeds, not a lot. This isn't going to be that hard to comprehend, but, you know, they talked about this math problem, this complex math problem. And part of it is used in answer to this question. If there's no central authority, how does the system decide if a block is valid and should be added to the chain? And so with the help of another short video that I'm only going to show you half of now, I hope to answer that question and make that a little bit more clear. So with that, here we go.
Blockchain, the hype word of 2018. But do you know how a decentralized peer-to-peer system with no authoritative figure makes decisions? The answer lies in consensus mechanisms. There are various consensus mechanisms, but they all serve the same purpose: to ensure records are true and honest. The difference is the way the consensus is reached. Here, we will explore 3 types of consensus mechanisms. First, let's take a look at proof of work. In a proof of work system, transaction data is stored in blocks, validated by having people solve a complicated math problem attached to it. This is typically done by powerful computers and is known as mining. A reward in the form of a cryptocurrency is issued to the first miner who cracks the problem. Lost? Well, let's break it down. Imagine a group of treasure hunters trying to open a chest with a complicated lock attached to it. Figuring out the correct combination is tedious, but the first person to do so gets rewarded. Simply put, proof of work is a race to figure out the right combination on a treasure chest. Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum use the proof of work mechanism.
All right, so we're going to get to some of the others later, but I wanted you to have a view of what proof of work is. So hang on, I got to get out of the video before I can go to my next slide.
Blockchain.
There we go. Okay, so that's, you know, a cartoon of what crypto mining looks like. These are some pictures, and in a moment we'll have one last video that shows you what does crypto mining look like in the real world. And so crypto mining and figuring out these math problems is done through these specialized computers called ASICs, which stands for application-specific integrated circuits. And they just do one thing. They just crunch through numbers to try and guess the answer to the math problem so that you can win the Bitcoins and validate the blocks. These ASIC machines are very often put into shipping containers. The shipping containers can be located all kinds of places. Here's a bunch of them inside a trailer. Here's what it looks like to be inside the shipping container. I understand they hold about 700 machines. And here are a bunch of machines. And you can also see fans on top. You can't see the fans. They must be on the back side of this one. But there's fans because these machines, just like our computers, you know, make heat. These machines run really hot, as we'll see in our next video. So this is a crypto mining plant in upstate New York, in the town of Messina, where it used to at one time be the Alcoa factory.
The inside of this former aluminum smelting facility looks different now.
Most people, when they first walk in, it seems a little bit crazy to putting in a digital currency data center here. But for us, you know, the more we've done it, the more we believe that it made a lot of sense.
A first difference. The old boss that ran these halls is replaced with Peril. He's a blockchain entrepreneur who co-founded the company that now rents the space, CoinMint.
We created a modularized data center inside of the building. You'll see, you know, right under 700 machines in each container. They're fairly simple machines. It's a computer server that's specifically built to perform the cryptography functions. 3 hashing boards, control board, and fans to cool it.
These computers are verifying Bitcoin transactions and adding them to the network's public ledger. This process is called mining. It's what generates new Bitcoins, which are created as a reward for the miners.
The amount of heat that comes out of a 1400 watt hairdryer is about the equivalent amount of heat that comes out of one of the machines. So if you step into the exhaust container and you want to envision 700 1400 watt hair dryers blowing into it, the thing that we need to do is get that heat out of the building.
And as it turns out, this building is really damn good at that. Cool air flows into the rooms from the open floors.
It goes up to the vaulted ceiling and out the monoduct,
sending that exhaust outside where it won't overheat the machines.
The dam is within around 5 miles of here, so there's transmission lines that run their 115,000 volt. 3 transformers here connected to those transmission lines. Inside the pot rooms, there's connect to additional transformers which step it down to the electricity that can be used for our machines.
Rather than buying power from a local utility, CoinMint went straight to the source.
We buy electricity on the open markets at market rate on a similar playing field that, or the same playing field that a regular utility would.
Their cost, at the time of this writing, is $26.67 per megawatt hour. That's a huge savings compared to the statewide retail average of about $200 per megawatt hour.
In the Bitcoin network, approximately every 10 minutes, a new block is generated. The miner that solves the hash for that block basically will get the reward. The current reward is 12.5 Bitcoins, plus the transaction fees for that 10-minute period.
The reward will go down over the years. And while Leary won't say just how many Bitcoins are generated here every day, he does say he is keen on the transaction fees.
So the transaction fees can be half a Bitcoin up to, I think, back in December when the network was going crazy, we saw as much as 6, 7 Bitcoins could be the transaction fees. There will be a point where transaction fees will become greater than the base mining reward. It'll be interesting to see, how it all plays out.
Okay, so that's it on videos for a while. We're now going to get more into some of the content. So I'm sure you could imagine from that description of 1400 watt hairdryer in a shipping container, and then that there are any number of shipping containers on this property and others. There's really a lot of energy use that goes on in solving these math problems. So these are statistics about how much energy Bitcoin used in 2021 from a guy who studies this on the Digiconomist website. This map shows the areas that are darker are the hotbeds for mining. So a bit going on in Russia, but more and more it's happening here. During 2021, Bitcoin consumed 130 terawatt hours in total, which is comparable to the electricity consumed by a country like Argentina. Its CO2 emissions were 64 megatons, enough to negate the entire global savings from deploying electric vehicles. The network handled 97 million transactions. That's only a little bit more than 0.1% of the worldwide volume of non-cash transactions, like Visa cards or whatever. Bitcoin was responsible for 0.5% of the global energy consumption. So even though they're not doing very much in the actual number of transactions, they sure are gobbling up a lot of energy. Their carbon footprint could power the US household for more than 1.5 months for just one transaction. The footprint of one Bitcoin transaction amounts to 658 kilograms of CO2, which is equal to the carbon footprint of almost 1.5 million Visa transactions. It's a bigger carbon footprint than the per passenger carbon footprint of a direct flight from Amsterdam to New York. And in total, the network consumed not quite double, but almost twice what it did in 2020. So it's growing by leaps and bounds. Some other issues are the e-waste. These machines work hard, they work 24/7, they work hot, and they wear out quick. So, a year and a half is about the lifespan on these processors. Plus, because you're in a context with all the other miners who are also trying to break, do the math problem, break the code, and get access to that treasure chest. The more machines you have and the newer and faster and better machines you have, the better chance you have of getting Bitcoins. There's also a lot of noise from the fans. So this is a mining facility with the storage containers stacked. And you can only begin to imagine how much these ventilation fans, how much noise they make. And this is actually up here in upstate New York, the Greenwich Power Plant, which is a old coal burning plant that converted to gas and now has decided to mine Bitcoin, draws water from the lake, from Seneca Lake through this pipe to cool their building from burning the gas to generate the power. So there's a lot of environmental impacts from this. It's interesting to see what's starting to happen in the global response to proof of work mining. And one of the big head turners was in June of this year, China threw out crypto mining because of the vast energy use and environmental concerns that they had. China is actually being really pretty aggressive in trying to reach its climate goals. I also understand that it was sucking up so much energy that more traditional manufacturing was having a hard time getting the energy they needed. In November of 2021, Sweden asked for the European Union to halt proof of work mining because of the climate concerns. And they thought that their renewable energy should be used for essential services. Norway echoed that feeling. And it's interesting when you think about where Sweden and Norway are located. They're in the cooler climates, and that's a desirable kind of area. But it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few months from the EU. In the US, there's been a very interesting thing. So you remember I said that in 2021, was it, I forget already, was it in June of 2021, China said no more crypto mining? Well, so watch what happens on this graph here on the top right. This big yellow area was China. That's how much crypto mining used to happen in China until here's May, here's June. They said, nope, we're not doing this anymore. And by the time we get a little bit further out, that second dot to the end, there's no more mining happening in China. And instead, we see, where do we see the biggest uptick in mining? What is this reddish area? Is the United States. And that's where we're seeing quite a growth of crypto mining. Here's a map that shows the distribution of where mining is happening the most. And New York and Texas are in competition for doing the most crypto mining, but we're out a little bit ahead, at least at the date of this map. We were at almost 20% of the mining that goes on in New York State, or in the US, happens in New York State. But we have seen some awful news stories of mining happening in other areas. In Pennsylvania, they're using what's called waste coal. So after they've done their mining, there's all these chips and shavings. They're now burning that lovely stuff to make energy to run the crypto mines. In Montana, they're just straight up using coal. in areas where there's been a lot of fracking for oil, we see something called what I call the fracking cycle. So you frack for oil, and that releases gas that generally gets flared. Crypto miners have come in and said, oh, no, we'll take that and you can burn it, but we'll turn it into electricity to use for mining crypto. And you know what else? We'll capture the CO2 and give it back to you so you can inject it into the well so you can keep fracking. Crazy stuff, crazy stuff that's happening. This is a little bit of a different thing. It just kind of is a thorn in my side. The Staples Arena, sports arena out in Los Angeles, recently underwent a name change from Staples to being the crypto.com arena. Guess who owns the sports arena is Anschutz. Some of you may recognize that name. Anschutz is the fracking company that sued the town of Dryden for the right to frack in the town of Dryden. And of course they lost. But so I thought it was really interesting to see how Anschutz is so interested in riding the crypto wave that they've renamed their stadium for crypto.com. So why upstate New York? What's happening here? And a lot of it has to do with the power supply that we have upstate as compared to downstate. So this is from the New York ISO's Power Trends book, and they talk about it as the tale of two grids. That upstate, we've got a grid that actually is pretty clean. We've got a lot of hydro, and then we've got carbon-free nuclear and some wind. So a lot of the energy that's produced in upstate is carbon-free. Whereas downstate, it's both more expensive and also dirtier energy. So a lot of these crypto companies come here because it's cool that the price of our electricity upstate, certainly relative to downstate, is much cheaper. Some of our economically struggling towns want the money, and it's cool, so it helps them with cooling. They also get the bragging rights of saying that they're using hydro or nuclear carbon-free power. So this is a list, and this is not a complete list, but it's all that I could, with good conscience put on this slide, because I know it's already illegible. It gets even worse if I really put up everything. But let's look on the pictures on the right to begin with. There are different kinds of facilities where we see crypto mining happening. And some are at hydro plants. This is a small hydro plant in Mechanicsville. We already saw the enormous hydro plant in Messina. This is the old DuPont factory outside of Niagara Falls, has now been taken over. These shipping containers, I counted 18 of them, times 700 machines per container. They're cranking out using a lot of energy to do that. And then on Seneca Lake, and this is kind of where this all started for a lot of us, is when Seneca Lake, the old coal burning power plant that started burning gas and really wasn't making a profit, all of a sudden said, hey, we got a new business model. We're going to mine Bitcoin on our property. And that's what they've been doing. And their greenhouse emissions have already gone up 10 times what they used to be. And right now they're only operating on 25 megawatts of power, but they're looking to increase to 100 megawatts in the coming year. So over here, I've identified the main plants that we know of. Some of them are not yet operating, but have said that they will be in 2022. Some of them, there's a little bit of a range. They're going to start at 250, but grow to 500. Anyhow, I tallied all of this up, leaving out the ones where we don't even know how many megawatts. And it comes to between 1,000 and 1,300 megawatts of new demand on our energy system. So what we're going to do now is look at the implications of that relative to what the state is trying to do for our clean energy goals. And over on the right-hand side, I've identified the main targets that we have under the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And that is that by 2030, we'll have 70% renewable energy on the grid. And by 2040, it will be 100% carbon free. We're also going to reduce our greenhouse gases 40% by 2030 and 85% by 2050. And while we're doing that, we're also going to be, because we have to stop these sources of greenhouse emissions of our cars and our houses, we have to electrify everything. We have to electrify our cars and our heating and our cooking, which means that the actual amount of electricity we need just to meet our basic day-to-day living demands, it increases as much as 50%. So now I want to bring you back to these graphs on the left. And the first one, the top one, in the dark green area, it shows the level of renewable energy that we produce right now. And these yellow arrows just point you to where we have to get to by 2030. So we've got a lot of ground to cover to get to 70% in the next 8 years. And meanwhile, in this lower graph, here's the way that the energy use is expected to grow as we electrify our cars and our houses. And this top line is the high estimate, of course, and the bottom line is the low estimate. If we are very good at our energy efficiency, you can see it's not really that much above baseline. And the forecast that, you know, everybody sort of looks at as most realistic is probably this middle one. I also just want to point you to this number in the red box because it's going to resurface again. That's the amount of gigawatt hours of actual energy we used in 2020. So 150,000 gigawatt hours. And you'll see why that number becomes important. So moving on, it's a heavy lift. This is where we're at now. Most of the energy in the state is from oil and gas, these brown colored things. 70% of our energy capacity in the state comes from fossil fuels. You know, now this doesn't get into the distinction of upstate, downstate, which we just talked about. This is collectively across the state. We still have 70% reliance on fossil fuels and 25% from hydro, some wind and solar. So we've really got, you know, and so we've got to not only convert over to this side with, you know, as you can see, lots more renewables, all these green colors, and lots more what they call baseload resources of hydro and nuclear that produce energy all the time, right? Solar and wind are intermittent. We also need to have storage, and this gray area is for long-term storage. So not only we have to make this conversion, but notice that the circle also gets a lot bigger because we've got to grow the amount of energy that we produce. So I want to put this in perspective a little bit. What does 70% renewables by 2030 mean? And the New York ISO says that in order to reach that, we've got to do this. We've got to have 15,000 megawatts of solar plus 8,700 megawatts of land-based wind. So I did a little math here to see, usually it's about 6 acres per megawatt. We need 141 square miles of solar installed in this state to reach this target. And for 8,700 megawatts of land-based wind, the target for offshore wind comes later, so I didn't include that in these calculations. But 4 megawatts per turbine, and these turbines are big beasts. They're bigger than the Statue of Liberty, and they have a 65-meter radius of the blades. They need to be spaced apart so that they don't interfere with each other. So we need to, in addition to the 141 square miles of solar, we need to install 940 square miles of wind. in the next 8 years. So now remember I looked at that table of all of those crypto mining things, and I said that it was between 1,000 and 1,300 megawatts of new load on our system that they're contemplating. So that, thankfully we're not there yet, but they're all looking forward to getting there. If they did that, 1,300 megawatts times 8,760 hours per year gives this many gigawatt hours. Remember that red box around the number 150,000 gigawatts? So if crypto mining builds out to where they project they're going to be in the next year or two, we will be adding more than 7.5% new load to our electric demand at the time that we're already trying to build out more than 8,000 Statue of Liberties upstate. So the conclusion that I've come to in looking at that is that this is a map of New York State. These dark lines are the major power lines, power transmission lines in the state. And these are the approximate areas where big solar and wind installations will go. These green things are storage batteries. Anyhow, and over here on the left, a couple of hydro, and I think there's one hiding behind my screen bar up at the top for the Messina area. In any case, Bitcoin is like a Pac-Man, just going to be riding around our grid wherever they can land a spot. They're going to set up shop and gobble up the energy that they can. It's remunerative enough right now. The payback on Bitcoin is still pretty hefty, about upwards of $40,000 per Bitcoin. So it's worth their time and effort to do that. And it's going to make it impossible to reach our renewable energy goals. The bottom line is crypto mining using proof of work method is unsustainable. So these miners raise a bunch of things that sound good, but they're really false solutions. They talk about the idea that they're going to build solar, that, if they're taking 100 megawatts off the grid, they'll put up a 100 megawatt solar farm. Except here's the thing, the sun doesn't shine all the time. And even when it does, so I'm going to use some of these smaller graphs here again, and just follow along. You don't need to get into the weeds of being able to read all the numbers. On this graph on the top right, this gold line represents sun, and sun in the early part of the day, it's not out. It ramps up over the day, and then, as we know, it goes back down again. So in effect, the sun has, now look at the circle graph on the left, solar has what the state calls 14% capacity factor. In other words, it's really, even on an optimal day, it's only generating about 14 of what it could. So, it might be a 1 megawatt panel or whatever, but it can't generate that much because the sun isn't out that much. And so back to a little bit more math up here, for 100 megawatts, you have to divide by this capacity factor, 14%, which means that you need to install 714 megawatts of solar to equal the 100 megawatts that you're taking off the grid. Again, the amount of total solar for the state was 15,000 megawatts. So just for this potentially one crypto mining place of 100 megawatts, it's increasing the total solar capacity that we need by almost 5%. That's staggering. Others, and many of them that are located near these hydro plants, say, hey, it's cool. We're using hydro. This is green energy. We're doing great. Well, no, because we need that hydro to replace the fossil fuels. They are, in fact, adding a new load without adding any new renewable power to offset their load. And so guess what? Instead, the power plants that we have right now, which are, as we know, gas and oil, have to ramp up to meet the additional load that they're putting on the system. So in fact, the fact that they're sucking up our hydro results in more carbon emissions. They also say that they'll use the excess wind and solar. They'll set up near some wind farms, and that the wind farms have to turn off sometimes. Well, yeah, it's true. Wind farms do every once in a while spin so hard in a heavy wind that they produce more energy than the transmission lines can carry. Here's my answers to that. Either put that energy into energy storage, because there's going to be days when there's not sun or wind and we need that energy, or fix the transmission lines so that they can carry more energy to the places that it's needed. But setting up crypto mining to park themselves by a solar farm or a wind farm is not what we should be doing with the renewable energy that we're producing. Some of the power plants or some of the crypto miners have fantasies that they're going to use renewable natural gas or hydrogen to power their plants in the future. Well, it's just not going to happen. There's a very limited supply of renewable gas. It comes from either landfills or cow manure and has to be processed. And guess what? When you burn it, you still make emissions. Hydrogen is right now made from fossil fuel or very, very costly methods to make it from renewables. And again, when you burn hydrogen, you still get smog, you get NOx emissions. Carbon offsets, I'm actually going to talk about in the next slide a bit more, because we've seen any number of plants that brag, oh no, we're buying carbon offsets. And it's just not the way to go. And so I'm going to talk about that in the next slide, because this is an important concept to understand. Our atmosphere has just a finite amount of more greenhouse gases that can be added before we start reaching tipping points. And the scientists tell us that that amount is 500 gigatons of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. They also told us that in 2020, that we were currently emitting per year about 50 gigatons. So far, that hasn't changed. So that means we're now 2 years further out, and we're seemingly along this pathway. But what the scientists tell us is that we have to go on this pathway, the lower path, if we're going to avoid tipping points. So that means we can't keep putting more carbon dioxide into the air. We've got to stop and get on this reduction pathway as soon as possible. So the rule of thumb with carbon offsets is that you first have to reduce everything that you can, reduce all of the emissions that are possible. And then, if there are a few things that you just simply can't reduce the emissions from, sure, use carbon offsets for that. So what are carbon offsets? Carbon offsets are a way of paying others to reduce their emissions to absorb the amount of CO2 that you're putting into the atmosphere yourself. So it's really mostly at a large scale, it's a greenwashing scheme. It's a pollute now, pay later, business as usual method. And it's not a viable near-term solution. Again, we need to reduce our greenhouse emissions as soon as possible. A lot of the offsets that we see and hear about are about growing trees. I got nothing against growing trees, but it takes a long time for a tiny little tree to turn into something that's going to absorb a lot of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And further, it's very fraught now with the droughts and floods and fires to even make this workable. Some others have talked about, well, we'll install renewables in developing countries. Well, okay, fine, but you're not offsetting anything. here at home. You're still adding the load to our grid. Why aren't you building the renewables here? And then they also talk about, carbon capture and sequestration. One horrifying method of which I talked about a little bit in the fracking cycle, where they take the CO2 and inject it back into the ground. So are there alternatives to proof of work mining? Is there some way to save the goodness of the crypto mining, or not mining, but of the blockchain methods without causing such horrible environmental problems? And the good news is that there are, and this is a continuation. This was that treasure chest video that you saw before. I'm just going to jump
blockchain,
ahead.
The hype word of 28. Blockchain, the hype word of.
All right, enough of you and your voice. I'm just going to jump ahead. So I hope you remember the analogy of, the treasure chest, and everybody trying to get into the treasure chest. So let's see. Okay, we're just about to.
These like Bitcoin and Ethereum use a proof of work mechanism. Next, we have proof of stake. Here, the creator of a new block, also known as a validator, is randomly chosen based on how much stake they commit to the network. Meaning to say, the higher the stake placed, the higher the chance to be selected as a validator. Let's apply this to the treasure chest scenario. Picture a group of treasure hunters vying for a chest. The chest is rewarded based on a lottery system. To participate, each hunter has to buy lottery tickets. The more each hunter buys, the higher the chance of winning. Blockchain protocols like Cardano's Ouroboros and EOS adopt the proof of stake consensus. Lastly, proof of authority. A modified form of proof of stake, here only approved parties selected based on their reputation can become validators. Let's revisit the treasure chest scenario. The group of treasure hunters form a union and pool their treasures. Based on their level of trustworthiness, a select few are appointed by the group to ensure the validity of the chest's content. IBM's Hyperledger Fabric and Ethereum's Coven testnet are some examples of blockchain systems that use proof of authority.
So what you can see from that is that there's no competition of having to guess a number that everybody is racing to do, and therefore buying gazillions of single purpose blow dryer computers to get it done, and to have the contest to be the winner. And so it's considered to be a much more efficient method to go with. From what I've heard from the computer scientists that I have heard speak on this, is that proof of stake, the second method that they showed, sort of the lottery system, is the one that seems to be becoming more utilized. And so what's actually now being talked about is that there are 3 generations, if you will, of blockchain technology. And this first generation is the proof of work that has takes much longer to make a transaction. It costs a lot more, and the energy use is through the roof, as compared to second generation, which is the proof of stake method, the lottery system, which brings the cost down, the time for the transactions down, and considerably reduces the energy requirement. And there's now even a third generation. I don't know enough to explain it to you, but I actually grabbed this table off of their website. It uses a distributed ledger technology that doesn't use a blockchain. It uses some other thing. But anyhow, it's even cheaper to run, faster to transact, and much more energy efficient. So there is a direction that we could go. And for me, the summary is this: that upstate New York is facing a proof of work Bitcoin mining explosion. Honestly, they feel like, to me, watching the Google searches and whatnot, it seems like they're coming up like mushrooms after a raid. Every other day, we're learning of some new crypto mining facility somewheres. The proof of work mining consumes astronomical amounts of energy. And some of those operations increase greenhouse gas emissions. Others are diverting clean energy resources from offsetting fossil fuel use. Proof of mining will interfere with meeting our state's greenhouse gas and renewable energy goals, and it's therefore unsustainable. Proof of stake, on the other hand, is much more energy efficient. It shows promise, and actually there's a lot of uses right now for proof of stake in smart contracts, and there are also proof of stake cryptocurrencies as well. So overall, you know, I put this cute little baby picture because I think that we're at a stage where we need to be careful. It's a nascent industry with some really exciting beneficial potentials. And so we need to be careful to not throw the blockchain baby out with the Bitcoin proof of work bathwater. I do want to just give some recognition as I finish up with some tremendous colleagues that we've been working with, both with Earth Justice and Seneca Lake Guardians, who have just done, Seneca Lake has just been amazing in raising awareness and bringing it literally to an international level of attention. The whole world is watching what's happening at the Greenwich Power Plant, and we're anxiously awaiting what the DEC decides. Also really want to give props to our own local assembly member, Anna Kellis, who has introduced a bill for a crypto mining moratorium at power plants using fossil fuels. And so this is the bill that Susan Moulter referenced in the introduction, that Senator Parker now has a bill that matches Anna Kellis's bill. And again, we're hoping to see them move quickly in this session. Ideally, you know, within the next couple of weeks would be wonderful. The other thing, and I just saw this in my email a couple of days ago, is Congress. So not New York State, but Congress is holding a hearing on the energy impacts of blockchain. So I think that that's really exciting, and I'd encourage you, if you can, to watch it next Thursday, 10:30 in the morning. And last, you know, I hope that this has been valuable for you, and that you would consider talking to your friends and family and sharing this video. It will be posted at the same link that you're watching it now on YouTube, so you can refer back to it. And with that, I'm now going to get out of screen sharing mode and start to say hello to you and field some questions. I also have made up a handy dandy virtual background that provides that information to you. So you can, if you didn't get a chance to write it down, while we go through the question and answers, I'm going to move out of the way so you can look at that and write down whatever information you want from that. I'd encourage you to get in touch on Seneca Lake Guardian's website, sign up for their email list so you can stay informed of what's happening. Please keep a watch on these bills, and if you have time, tune into the congressional hearing. So with that, Sally, I am ready for questions.
Well, thank you, Irene, so very much for an incredibly informative and thought-provoking talk. As you said, my name is Sally Grubb. Together with my colleagues Pam Talbot and Anne Ward, we've been assembling the questions that have been submitted tonight. And many questions have been submitted and answered by other people in the audience, and we will not be including those. But all of them will be shared when this goes onto YouTube afterwards. So you won't lose these questions. The first question, which I know the answer to, but is a reflection on what an incredible talk this was from a Helen Baker, who wanted to know who prepared the PowerPoint presentation. So in addition to that, I would like to say, where did you get all your information from?
Well, thanks. I actually, it's one of my ways of relaxing. I love putting together PowerPoints. So thanks to whoever found it a valuable format, and at least I hope it was. I got my information from a variety of sources. A lot of it came from the New York ISO, NYISO, stands for the New York Independent System Operator, who actually, in a lot of ways, runs our electric grid and our electricity markets. They put out a really wonderful booklet every year called Power Trends. And so if you wanted to learn more of what's happening, they really do a wonderful job of making it user-friendly. I find it a fascinating read. It comes out each year. I'm trying to remember, I think it's in the fall. I think it's like October. But if you Google NYISO, NYISO, Power Trends 2020, I guess would be the most recent one that you could find right now. You'll see. And trying to remember, was it the 2018 one where they talked about the tale of two grids, which is kind of a fascinating story in itself. So I just became an energy geek. I started as a veterinarian many years ago and was involved at Cornell, but after doing the Cornell thing and retiring and getting on with my life, I learned about first fracking and then the power plant. And I just started reading and learning and asking questions, and Google's an amazing tool. And so I've been learning about energy in our state for the past 12 years. And so some of the stuff that's in there is just kind of accumulated knowledge that I couldn't tell you where. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So we got a clutch of questions about math puzzles.
Yeah.
And I'm going to read them all out to you. They're not necessarily all related totally. One refers to validation others to the math problems. How does being able to solve a complex math puzzle relate to being able to validate a block? What is the connection?
The connection.
Hang on, let me go
okay.
on.
Okay.
Where do the math problems originate? Another question, it doesn't understand where the puzzles come from. Who writes and creates them? And then what is the connection between just solving a math puzzle and verifying a transaction? It seems to be two different things that are unrelated.
Yeah. I almost put a slide in on this and I thought, it's too in the weeds. Nobody's going to want to do that. So I'm going to try and talk about it without the slide. And so first, the purpose of it. This is a network of, theoretically, it's so weird the way they talk about this as if it's people, because it's not, it's machines. And they're machines that are super expensive. And so it's only people with lots of money that buy these machines. Or people who don't have lots of money, but hope that by buying a few machines that they're going to crack the code and be able to mine a Bitcoin and win some coin. But so it's a network of essentially strangers, or, let's just go with the people analogy because I don't know how else to describe it well. So it's a network of strangers, and how do you trust anybody to verify the fact that that you just gave me $10 or I gave you $100 or whatever, right? Or 100 coins. And so because there is no inherent trust, you have to, a couple of things. One is select who does the verifying randomly. Because if I'm in cahoots with somebody, we could falsify the transaction of how much I really gave or how much you really gave me or whatever. So it's part of it is to find a mechanism to randomize. And the other part of the math problem is, and this goes to the definition of proof of work, is that it sort of means that you've got some skin in the game. You had to invest enough to own machines, just buy the electricity. So the idea is that you're not going to mess with stuff if you are yourself invested in it and, you know, part of it. So that's the best explanation I can give as to the why behind the math problem. What the math problem actually consists of is kind of fascinating if you're nerdy like me. So it's a type of encryption that gets used a lot, you know, when we, you know, put our credit card number, or when we, you know, even just put our name, and, you know, it gets stored encrypted. I forget the actual language of it, but it's a code, something 256, SHA 256, I think it is. And when you multiply SHA 5256 by whatever this thing is, whether it's a string of letters or a string of numbers or a sentence or whatever that you're going to encrypt, it converts it into a string of ones and zeros, and into a string of ones and zeros that is utterly unique to that entry, that number. And then the math problem, and so the string of ones and zeros has 256 elements in it, 256 ones and zeros. And then the math problem is, guess what the input number was. And you only get the output number. You only get the set of 256 ones and zeros. And it might be, you know, what number of an input gives you a string of 256 where the first 23 numbers in that string are all zero. And there is literally no way that you can figure out the answer to that other than just guessing, other than just literally having a machine that's just going to, you know, guess number after number after number after number after number, and who hits the jackpot and gets the right number first. It's a wacky, crazy, but, you know, robust method. And I will try to find, there's a video that I found helpful in coming to understand more of this, and I'll put it into the YouTube video comment area afterwards for anybody that really wants to learn more about 256 ones and zeros.
There's a question here, and there was another one. Is it possible to figure out how to use the heat generated to make energy for other uses? Is it possible to use the waste heat, the waste energy, to power up multi-story buildings in other locations?
Yes, it is possible to do waste heat to energy, waste heat to storage. There are mechanisms for doing that. A lot of these things are not located nearby buildings or whatever. And, you know, bottom line is you lose efficiency in doing that. There's from whatever the initial energy source is, you know, a solar panel, even if it's, you know, sitting in the sun, you know, perfect direct sunlight all day long, 24/7, you know, let's just imagine. It only has about a 30% conversion rate of the number of photons that hit it to how many actually produce electricity versus how many produce heat and other, you know, infrared or, you know, ultraviolet or whatever other kind of wavelengths and stuff that happen to it. So it's any kind of process of making energy is inefficient. And so to then capture it and then save it and store it and move it and use it somewhere else, you'd be better off just having that, you know, a source of energy at that building or whatever. But certainly you'd be better off using proof of stake or other kind of method, rather than this crazy math problem thing, to have a trustworthy network, even though it's made up of strangers. So the bottom line is, it's just proof of work is just utterly inefficient use of energy that just shouldn't be allowed, in my opinion.
Okay. This question is from one of our local politicians, Leslie Danks Burke. Since New York must reach 70% renewable energy use by 2030, what will crypto's 7.5% new and growing annual load of energy use do to the cost of energy for low-income people?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Leslie. And the answer, again, isn't simple. Energy is cheapest for us when it's closest to us. So, the energy, if you're lucky enough to have a house that has a roof in the sun and you have solar on your roof, that's cheaper to just, suck that energy right into your house than it is to have a solar farm 8 miles away, where again, as the electrons travel through the wires to get to your house, there's energy lost. So there's kind of an expense for the lost energy. The other thing that happens on the grid is, it's, sorry to use, these kind of terms, because I know they're not accurate, but they're how I understand stuff. And I hope it helps people understand it too. But an electrical engineer would hammer me for this if I were to say that we end up with traffic jams. If there's an area that really has a high demand, and if the wires aren't sufficient, you can get traffic jams of electrons trying to get through the wires. And it makes it more expensive to get the electricity to where it needs to go. It's part of why we have the expense between the cost difference between upstate and downstate. There's a lot of transmission traffic jams to bring energy downstate, and so it's just it has to take a longer route. You lose more of the energy, and like that. It's locational based marginal increase or something like that changes.
Thank you. We're beginning to run out of time, so I'm jumping forward to ask one question that I think is really appropriate. It concerns the proposed moratorium to prevent future crypto mining. Does the proposed moratorium on crypto mining until they have done energy research, prevent future crypto mining and allow the current mining, or does the moratorium forbid current mining as well? Then to clarify this question, does the New York State bill that's proposed establish a moratorium on cryptocurrency mining only at facilities using fossil fuels, as opposed to those who are using hydro? Is it only for proof of work? And then, would the current crypto mining moratorium bill stop crypto mining by entities such as Weitzman that are just doing it out of what looks like portable shipping containers that are plugged into the grid?
Right. So it does not. It does not address the Weitzman issue. It doesn't address the DuPont issue that has 18 shipping containers. It doesn't address the Messina hydropower plant. The current legislation addresses not already existing, but prohibits any future proof of work mining that occurs at a place that generates fossil fuels to power the mining process. So it's narrowly focused, and the intent was to use that as a stepping stone to then get to other options and you know other levels of moratorium. But it's clear that we need, it's clear to me that we need broader action. But this was something, you know, we've been learning about this as we go, and really things radically changed just this past summer when China said no more. You can see that you know, mining has really picked up here since then. And so all of these new locations that are popping up, it's kind of new to us, and we didn't expect it. And so there will definitely need to be more. But I've talked with Anna about the bill, and there's been good momentum, good thought behind and support that the Senate had passed a previous version. They've now altered it to match up with Anna's version. I hope that they will pass that one as well. And then, you know, hopefully the Assembly will get it through the gate as well, and we'll get a bill soon. And, you know, and then we'll have to go back and write more or ask the governor to do more. You know, the governor, we believe, has the authority to put a moratorium on all new crypto mining, just like, you know, Governor Patterson put a moratorium on fracking. We think that Governor Hochul has the same authority to do all proof of work. And I want to be really careful with the language. This isn't about cryptocurrency. This is about proof of work mining. It's not about, you know, having it in for cryptocurrency broadly. It's really about this one particular method of creating trust and verification within the blockchain. That's the problem.
Following on that, and as we're coming to the end of time, I'm going to, where you've been asked to share a list of talking points that can be referenced when people reach out to their legislators and regulators, possibly to be added as a PDF attached to the recording of the YouTube.
Yeah, actually what I would do is encourage people to join up at Seneca Lake Guardian, because you know, talking points sometimes need to change to be responsive to things that are happening in the moment. You know, that some group has just voiced, you know, opposition because of whatever reasons they oppose, and so we may need new talking points to address the concerns that they've raised. So I really encourage people to go to the Seneca Lake Guardian website and sign up to stay in the loop. But I appreciate that people want to get involved. That's terrific.
So we still have several questions that we haven't answered, and I'm afraid we don't have time to answer them tonight. They will all be in YouTube, so I don't know if there's any way, Irene, that you would be able to answer them offline or through posting somewhere.
Yeah, well, you know, I can go to the chat at YouTube and type in some answers. You know, probably not as long-winded as I've just been with them, but I can try to address some of them. You know, the other thing is I'm okay with staying if you know, people do want to stay, and I don't know, Sally, if you and others you know, want to stay for another 10 minutes or something, I could do that. But up to you.
Well, no, I think we decided that
we're going to call it quits. Okay.
So we want to say thank you very much indeed. And if you have an email that you want to share or anything like that, please do that. If not, we'll work out how to get answers to some of these posted through YouTube.
Yeah, why don't I just, I can just give my email if people want to jot it down. Please do not type it into the Google chat. That would be a nightmare. But
well, I'll tell you what we'll do is if you come to the League of Women Voters website, we will find a means through there of communicating with Irene.
Okay, do you have like a contact form or something there, Sally? People can send you a message and...
Yes.
Okay, great, let's do that.
Okay, there's the email for the Tompkins County League of Women Voters. You can do pres.tclwv@gmail.com.
You want to just repeat that in case people didn't quite get it?
pres.tclwv@gmail.com. So thank you, Irene, very much indeed.
Oh, well, thank you. This has really been, I feel honored that you guys asked me to do this, and really appreciative of the timing, because as I said, the legislature is just getting underway and we hope to get this passed quickly. So thanks to everyone who attended tonight and for your attention and your thoughtful questions, and to the League. You guys always do an amazing job of clustering the questions, which was really helpful. And I just appreciate this opportunity so much. So thank you.